Well, welcome into the WholeHog Football Podcast. I am Seth Campbell, and we're joined by Scottie Bordelon here in just 1 second. And this is unique for us. We're going live for the first time. Big things happening here at WholeHog. But we just wanted to come live. We really haven't been giving you a whole lot of updates. And honestly, spring football has kind of been overshadowed by the basketball team going deep in the NCAA tournament. Baseball is going on as well. So there's a lot of things that have been going on that we haven't been able to really talk a whole lot about spring football, but we wanted to do that now. So Scottie and I will open it up. If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. We'll actually look at those later towards the end of the show. But basically, we're going to talk quarterbacks. We're going to talk wide receivers. And then we'll also flip over to the other side, talk a little bit about how we feel about the linebackers in secondary. But then also that there are those other guys on the team, which is the defensive line that we want to get into as well. So without further ado, I will give it on over to Mr. Bordelon. Scottie, let's start quarterback battle. Is KJ Jefferson the quarterback?
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that KJ is, your front runner right now. Like, just going to pretty much every practice from the start of spring all the way through the spring game, KJ just looked like the guy you would have wanted him to be, just in terms of, command of the offense and confidence, leadership. I think he improved the touch on his deep ball throughout the spring, and fans got to see that a little bit, especially early on in the spring game on Saturday. That was kind of one of my concerns coming into the spring. Felipe Franks gave Arkansas a huge leg up last year because a great quarterback play can kind of mask a lot of other issues on offense. Felipe he broke the single season completion percentage record, if I'm not mistaken, in his only year here. He threw the deep ball exceptionally well the 1 year that he was here. And one of his top targets when he was pushing the ball down the field was Mike Woods. And so my concern was, KJ Jefferson, I think in the past has not always shown to be the most precise down the field passer. So I was a little bit concerned with Mike Woods not being as big of a part of the offense this upcoming season just because KJ's had, some accuracy issues throwing the ball downfield.
Right.
But, if KJ puts the ball on the money, Mike Woods is going to be open. I mean, he's got some of the best footwork in the SEC, and the kid's a burner. Like, he's a burner, and he will break past his initial defender with that footwork and that handwork that he's become really, really good at. So, like, if you just put the ball on the money, Mike's going to be a big-time playmaker. And second play of the game, or third play of the game, second pass KJ threw was a touchdown to Mike Woods.
Right.
And that I think settled a little bit of the, I don't know if you call it doubt, but maybe some of the concerns I had. But KJ's looking good. There's no doubt in my mind that he's going to be the guy going into the fall. And it's going to take an unbelievable fall camp from one of the guys behind him to unseat him at that QB1 spot.
Yeah, I think that you take the quarterback controversy, or quote-unquote controversy, and you put it 6 feet under. I think that KJ showed you everything that you want out of a starting quarterback for Arkansas. Are there going to be question marks? Sure. He's never been a true full-time starter in the SEC. There's always going to be question marks. But what he showed you, and then what the guys behind him showed you, KJ is going to be your guy. And spring games are just, like, for lack of a better word, Scottie, there's way too much emphasis put on spring games because you're playing against yourself. And you've been playing against yourself for 15 practices. And you need those practices, don't get me wrong. But the fact is, like, if the offense does really well, then that brings up question marks about the defense. If the defense does really well, it brings up question marks about the offense.
Yeah, that started after KJ's first drive when he completed a 33-yard ball to Burks and then the touchdown pass to Mike Woods because Mike Woods burned, I think it was Simeon Blair. And Simeon Blair was one of the guys that Sam Pittman had been praising for most of the spring. And so you're like, what happened to Simeon Blair on that play? Well, Mike Woods is pretty good, y'all.
Yeah.
Like, Mike Woods, I think, if he didn't put the SEC on notice last year that he was a big-time playmaker, like he's definitely going to this year, as long as, KJ can be precise.
And then I also think that what you saw out of KJ and what everybody is saying is that you are going to utilize him in the run game. Mm-hmm. And it's impossible to utilize anybody in the run game in a spring game because you're not going to get your quarterback hurt in a spring game. So literally you can have a guy running by him that just sticks out of hand and he's tackled. And we know that KJ, he's a big quarterback. He's hard to bring down. So that's an entire element of his game that you just take out in the spring game. But even taking that element out, he was the best quarterback that Arkansas had. His accuracy was better. His decision-making was way better than anybody else's. And I think that's just the experience and the reps that he has. And I think that, like you said, unless, I don't know, the backups just like get on another level in the summer and come back in the fall as, I don't know, like they got hit with some radiation or something and are now Superman or the Hulk. Like, I just don't think that there's any way that KJ loses this starting spot.
And think about, too, like another kind of feather in KJ's cap is think about some of the situations he's been placed in the past, just adverse situations. He starts on the road a couple of years ago at LSU when LSU's #1 in the country, in Baton Rouge, Death Valley at night. And then last year, he gets thrown into a situation at Missouri. I don't know if it was necessarily on short notice. I think he understood that he was probably going to start that Missouri game by Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest. But he comes out and he pretty much goes out and wins you a game on the road at Missouri against a pretty good defense. I think I remember that week I was asking Sam Pittman what he thought about Missouri's secondary because I think they allowed the fewest passing yards per game in the SEC. And then KJ goes out there and he throws for a career high. I think he threw for 270-something yards. And he looked really good. Like he got some fortuitous bounces, with the 2-point conversion at the end. Like that's an interceptable pass that just happened to bounce your way. But
right,
it's kind of on the defense to catch those. But KJ, I think, while he doesn't have just a ton of experience, the experience that he does have, I think, is really, really valuable. And so he's not going to be. I don't think he's going to go into week 1 or possibly that Texas game, and he's not going to be a deer in the headlights. I feel like he's going to be ready.
I feel like he's going to be ready too. I think that while it may not have been great for last year's team, you might have beaten Missouri if you had Felipe Franks. Caveat, you can't play really better than KJ
You could have beat Missouri last year. You get one stop.
Yeah, exactly. So caveat to that is the fact that KJ really isn't the one that cost you that game. So coming back, though. But you do have a guy with experience. While he hasn't been an everyday starter, I say that because I guess it's baseball season, everyday starter in my head. But while he hasn't been a starter in the SEC regularly, he does have experience. He does know what it takes to beat some of those good teams. So I think all of that combined, like you said, will push him and has pushed him to the top of that quarterback room.
So quick question for you. What did you think of Malik Hornsby the other day? Like when, we did track and chart, passes by depth of the field and then interceptable passes and things like that. Malik had a few more than KJ did.
Interceptable passes?
Yes.
Yeah, 4.
Also, he had his good moments, and then it was pretty fun watching him when he was able to stretch his legs a little bit.
When he got in the open field, I mean, Arkansas hasn't had a mobile quarterback since Matt Jones like that.
Yeah, Malik is, when he's in the open field,
he's one of the quickest athletes out on the field.
He's impressive.
And,
very impressive.
He's not, there were guys like Brandon Allen, Austin Allen, even Felipe, you didn't mind him taking off and running.
Malik is a completely different type of athlete.
Exactly. When he got out in the open field, you were like, okay, I understand a little bit where this guy's potential is. It was just one of those things of, I think that the game may be too fast for him right now, which may be cliche to say, but it may be true.
Yeah.
Guys were coming
based
at him
on some of the decisions he was making the other day. I think that's fair.
Yeah, guys were just coming at him, and he wasn't trying to take a sack. And so he was throwing the ball into coverage, and so much of that stuff, we don't really realize it just sitting up there from the stands, but from what I've talked to, not talked to, but listened to interviews from really good quarterbacks, is like 75% of the play as a quarterback, if you're passing, has been drawn up before you even snap the ball. So that way you just read and react. So I think that it's one of those things of he's just going to have to get more comfortable. And he may be your quarterback of the future because I loved his speed once he got into the open field. Just some of those decisions need to get better.
For sure. And I think Sam Pittman made a pretty good point the other day. So just talking about KJ Jefferson improving his accuracy as a pocket passer this spring, I think that part of his game grew in part because when he tucked the ball and ran, he couldn't really, like, you can't determine whether he ran for like 12 or 15 yards. So knowing that he was going to be tagged once he got, between 5 and 10 yards downfield, he maybe thought twice about pulling the ball and running. And so he stood in the pocket a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I think it made him a little bit better of a pocket passer. And I think the same could be said for Malik Hornsby. I think Malik's got kind of a baseball windup type throwing motion, but he's got a rocket for an arm. And the touchdown pass he threw to John David White the other day was pretty impressive, which makes me wonder if John David White, once we start talking about receivers, if he's going to have if he's legitimately going to crack maybe the top 5 or top 6 at that receiver spot.
That's a great segue into receivers, Scottie. I think that Arkansas's receivers depth is fantastic. I think that it matches anybody in the SEC there. If they were as deep at the other positions on the field as they were at the wide receiver position with talent, then I think that Arkansas could be a formidable foe in the SEC. Well, as it stands, though, you look at the wide receiver room, and Treylon Burks is as good as any receiver that you're going to see. He's quick, good hands. Mike Woods, you just said, is a problem, and I think he is a problem because he's that good.
I think he's pushing into that class with Treylon Burks, especially what we saw last year. He can be a game breaker. And guys from Florida were not really a match for him on the perimeter. I think he caught 2 passes last year for over 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, those are just, I guess, Randy Moss type numbers. His footwork is really good. I just keep going back to that. And he works at that a lot. I know it. If you watch his YouTube channel, you can find some of the footwork drills that he does. And then he's got legit speed. Once he breaks past that initial defender where he can take the top off of a defense and just kind of blow by a safety. Do we think I think he's physical enough too. He doesn't have he's not as filled out obviously as Treylon Burks is, but Mike is not afraid to go over the middle of the field and catch a big ball on 3rd down. We saw him do that, I think, last year against Auburn, I think on a 4th down play. So I think Mike's got everything that you want in a receiver. So you've got 2 guys that you feel super good about. Then it's, who do you turn to? Is it Trey Knox? He had a nice catch against Hudson Clark where he kind of battled him one-on-one for position on a deep ball, which that was good to see. I think it would be really beneficial for KJ Jefferson if Davion Warren is able to come back and be healthy again. Because Davion was having a terrific year last year before, he unfortunately got hurt returning a kickoff in a game that was out of hand, which I just don't think that should have happened in the first place. He shouldn't have been back returning kickoffs. But I think Davion Warren's legit too. It's just, can he get back up to speed? Can he return to 2020 form? And then after that, maybe a guy like Tyson Morris. He's not had a great all around year. I wouldn't say, but he can come up with some fairly timely catches for you. And then a guy and then you just think about some of the young guys like a Keytron Jackson and Jaden Wilson. Who else? You could throw in maybe a Kendall Catalon, John David White. You've got some options. It's just, I think Arkansas needs that 4 through 6 group to really rise, and some guys need to, kind of separate themselves from the rest of the pack.
I could see John David White being a slot guy. Auburn utilizes those kind of guys all the time. If he's a reliable hands, and he can get open, then why would you not use him? Yeah, he got open against the second team defense in the spring game, so you'll obviously have to see how he does against the first team. But why can't he be that quote-unquote possession receiver, the guy that you can throw to? And if you spread him out wide and you have 4 receivers out there, I'm sorry, but if you're going to put a linebacker out there on White, I'm going to feel good about White. But if you put even if you don't put White out there, if you put somebody else, Keatron Jackson, if you have Davion Warren, Trey Knox, and Burks and Woods, I'm feeling real good about that. I think that the Arkansas's receivers depth is for sure where you want it to be. And it's just one of those situations of our guy's going to step up. Sorry, and then also is Davion Warren going to play the way that he played last year, which was a surprise. But if you can get those guys to come out, play like they did, then that gives KJ Jefferson some weapons, make you have to respect the weapons on the outside, and you can utilize his feet better. All that said, though, he does have to have time, which you have to hope that his offensive line can give him. Yeah,
and I think Hudson Henry and Blake Kern are going to give him 2 other kind of safety blankets, I guess, for the lack of a better term. At tight end, too. Hudson Henry's he's got to stay healthy.
That's a really good point.
He's struggled with that since he's gotten here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Scottie. But that's a really good point in the fact of that. I think probably 70-ish%. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I charted formations that Arkansas was in last year, and over 50% for sure, probably 60 to 70% of Arkansas's offensive plays are run with 11 personnel. They're going to have a tight end and a running back, and then 3 wide receivers. So while we're talking about 4th and 5th options and 6th options of the wide receiver spot, and you do need those, you are going to have a guy like Kern step up or Hudson Henry be healthy, because the tight end position is important for Arkansas in the running game and getting open and having the ball thrown to you.
Yeah, I think when we were talking to Sam Pittman about, I think previewing the spring game, someone asked him, if he was still, maybe monitoring the transfer portal for maybe some more help on the defensive line in terms of maybe getting another pass rusher. Sam Pittman said that they would probably, they've got some scholarships that they can push into next year. If they grabbed another guy from the portal, it would probably be a defensive lineman or someone that they could get the ball in the hands of. So maybe another tight end. Because you could, some days at spring ball, we'll go out to the practice fields and that tight end room would be fairly thin. I mean, there's a couple of guys, no offense to them, but their name, I didn't really recognize their name when I looked at the tight end spot, and I looked at some of the names on the roster at the tight end position. But Blake Kern had a pretty good year last year. Best year of his career by far, because I think he came into last year without a catch to his name, and made some splash plays at times. And if Hudson Henry can stay healthy and just keep progressing, I feel like that's his position to take. And you also feel pretty good about Blake Kern too, so you could be feeling pretty good about going too deep at tight end. And Sam Pittman's also said that he would like to get into more 12 personnel, where he's got 2 tight ends on the field, and might help with the some short yardage power running type stuff.
Well, let's talk a little bit. We'll flip over to the other side. We didn't mention running backs, and we didn't mention offensive line. Obviously, if you go to WholeHogSports.com, we'll have some stuff just about both of those things. But also, Scottie, when you look at it, defense is where they made their hay a little bit last year with the zone defense against Mississippi State and Ole Miss, the Mississippi schools, to really get them some victories. And this year, I'm curious to see what the defense is going to look like. They've switched between 3-man and 4-man front. Obviously, if you do the 3-man front, then you're going to drop and have more versatility in the back of the defense. But it's one of those things of Arkansas just didn't get any pressure, and that was a plan. That was by design. And they were dropping back, and they were just going to live with it. But can you generate more pressure with 3 guys this year? Can you play man-to-man defense on the outside? And if you can do all those things, then I think that the future is really bright, and you can have a repeat of what you did in 2020. There's still some question marks. You don't really like to see Trey Knox. I literally just went blank on his name. He bullied the cornerback. It was on top of him.
Hudson Clark.
Hudson Clark. Thank you, Scottie. Wow. You don't really like to see that from your first string corner, but still, like there are things that this defense can build on.
Yeah, I think so. I feel better about Arkansas being able to generate a pass rush because, especially at the end spot, Zach Williams looks really good. So last Thursday, Arkansas's last practice before the spring game, I'm standing on the grass field, and I'm pretty close to where Jamil Ashley is working the defensive lineman through individual work, and they're in helmets, shorts, and jerseys, no shoulder pads. Zach Williams has the sleeves on his jersey rolled up, and sun's out, guns out. Yeah. Zach Williams looks like a completely different player than he did last year. Like, he's up to 264, 265 pounds, and he thinks he can add 10 to 12 more and still feel like he's carrying good weight. Like, he's carrying good weight right now. You always worry a little bit about a guy maybe slipping with his quickness if he adds weight, but I think this was needed weight for Zach Williams because he came in really thin. Undersized as a lineman, but he looks like he belongs here now. So you got him at one end, and I think the other end spot, who are some guys there?
I mean, you got Dorian Gerald that's going to be healthy this year. I mean, he hasn't been a real big factor since he's been here because he's gotten hurt like the first game both times.
Yeah.
But he provides depth.
Mateo Soli's an option. Should have gotten my notebook out, but Eric Gregory in the middle, I like him. Isaiah Nichols, he battled a little bit of an ankle injury this spring. I don't know exactly how much he got done this spring just because he wasn't out there a lot because he was just kind of banged up. But Isaiah going down for a little bit, kind of opened the door a little bit for a guy like Taurean Carter. And Taurean Carter, he's looking the part too. Like I would have loved to have seen what Taurean Carter could have done in the spring game if everyone was live. A quarterback could take a shot, or you just kind of get to him, wrap him up instead of just tagging him. So that's no fun to watch. But Taurean Carter, I think, he pushed himself toward the top of the defensive tackle spot. And then if you go to a 4-down front, maybe you can get Isaiah Nichols and Taurean Carter on the field, or one of those two guys with Eric Gregory. Jashad Stewart made a jump at defensive end too. So that's kind of interesting that you've got, a couple of, former standouts at high school programs in the state, and Zach Williams and Jashad Stewart kind of making pushes for playing time, a little bit more secure roles this fall. Sam Pittman talked on and on just about Jashad Stewart, the motor that he plays with. Like, every down you're going to get everything that he's got. And Sam Pittman is going to reward those guys that play with that kind of relentless nature. He's going to reward those guys. And so I don't have any doubt that Jashad Stewart is probably going to factor in at some point and look pretty good doing it.
For sure, Scottie. All right, well, they look pretty good at the linebacker position. We know what they have with Grant Morgan returning. Bumper Pool is still there. Like, we know what that group looks like. But I think the biggest question mark is that defensive line and what they are going to look like, how much pressure they're going to bring, and really what front. They played a lot of a four-man. I think they only played a four-man front, if I'm thinking correctly, in the spring game, in the red-white game. But that was because Pittman said in the post game that was where they hit where they had done a lot of reps in the three-man front, so they wanted to practice the four-man. It'll be interesting to see which front they decide to go with. in the regular season. All right.
Defense went into the spring game. Sam Pittman said that Barry Odom he took 4 calls in with him. So you're not really going to glean just a whole lot from what the defense did. I think just a standout maybe. I liked what Christopher Paul, they call him Pooh Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was toward the top of his team in tackles. He was kind of everywhere, and I forgot how much I enjoyed watching Jalen Catalon just kind of lay the wood to some guys. Like, he did it a couple times, and you're just like, wow. You just missed kind of that physicality from him and the way that he just kind of headhunts. I don't know if headhunting is the right word, but he does do that. I joked with you during the game the other day. I said they should just eject him for targeting just so that they could practice that scenario moving forward.
At least he doesn't have to walk off to the locker room anymore, right?
So, sometimes I remember maybe they got rid of this because Chad Morris did it, but spring games they used to practice something like that.
Oh, those beanie bowls. Do you remember those before the season? Those were awful.
Yeah. So you kind of script a player getting ejected so you know the protocol, who's going to take the player to the locker room, who's going to sub in for him. How do you kind of react to that little bit of adversity? But Arkansas needs Jalen Catalon. They need all of him. They need him to keep his head up in games. I think he could have a monster year.
So as you mentioned, Jalen Catalon, is there a concern? I guess it would be the more appropriate about the secondary. Obviously, we mentioned that the defensive line is the biggest question mark on the team, but the secondary, at times when you dropped 8, would still just get picked on. Obviously, you had Jalen Catalon back there, but you felt like there was a lack of depth at some spots in there. Are you okay with where Arkansas is coming out of spring practice right now?
I think so. And I talked to somebody about this the other day when I was watching it practice several times throughout the spring. They would go to a 3-2-6, where they can get more speed and athleticism on the field in the secondary. And, the ones go through several reps, and then the coaches call for the second team defense to jump on the field. And the second team defense has guys like Miles Slusher and Ladarius Bishop, Trent Gordon, and Kari Johnson. Like, some of those guys, those are talented guys. I mean, Kari Johnson got to play a little bit last year. Trent Gordon, I'm curious. I'm eager to see more of him. I think pretty talented kid from Penn State. So I mean, just that right there kind of tells you that you've got a bit more depth in the secondary, because there's more names there's more guys that you feel comfortable with running with that second team defense. And then a freshman, Jayden Johnson. I mean, I think I leaned over to you one time and was like, he's one of the more physically impressive guys that on the whole defense. And he's a really young guy. I think he's like 6'2", maybe 210, 215, and still learning. Obviously, he still looks very green sometimes, but he's got the physical tools. It's just, if he gets really in tune with what the defensive staff wants from him, and he buys in completely, that kid's he's gonna be really good, because you just look at him and you know that he's got it. So I feel pretty good about the secondary as a whole.
All right, Scottie, I'm going to put you on the spot here in just 1 second. So I'm going to pose the question, and then I'm going to go on a little tangent, and then that'll give you time to think about the question. But 3 things. Looking at Arkansas' schedule, we're going to look ahead a little bit now and give you time to pull that up. How do you think they finish in the SEC, looking at their schedule and their record? And this is, granted, preliminary stuff. This is just after spring. We obviously, if you listen and follow the WholeHog family of podcasts, then Scottie and I made some predictions in the basketball podcast of Mid-America that we got to look back on and laugh at because they didn't all come true. So
yeah, I think I predicted a under 500 SEC finish after that bad week on the road.
Yeah, no, I was right there with you. I was like, I just don't know how they're going to finish.
Didn't see it at the time.
So these are not going to be necessarily set in stone, and we're going to allow Scottie to change. But SEC record, and then just from what you've seen in the spring, some guys that for the 2021 season you would name as your offense and defensive MVPs. I'll get into all of that, but I just wanted to remind you also, if you have a question for Scottie, you can leave it in the chat over there. We are monitoring that if you want some questions. We don't have any right now, so we're always open. This is, as I said, just our first Whole Hog Football live, so just gaining the following a little bit, and if there have been a few hiccups, which I think there have, we're working those out. But all of that to say, you can also check out some more great content on WholeHogSports.com. All right, Scottie, let's start with the record. This is probably the one that more people are interested in than anything else. Where do you think this team, because this is a team that, listen, they won 3 games in an all-SEC schedule. They were going to a bowl game until TCU decided to have COVID. Obviously, they didn't decide. These things just happen. But
no, they was scared.
But all of that to say, where is this team going to finish? Because they add Texas to the schedule, a game that Arkansas has been owed since 2009.
That's going to be a fun weekend, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And then you have 3 winnable non-conference games, but then you have the SEC East schedule that you have for, or not the SEC East, the SEC West schedule that you've had for forever. And then the SEC East, if I'm not mistaken, you get Georgia and then Missouri. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be pleasant going in the East. Where do you think this team lands?
So I got asked that question on Saturday after the spring game, and I said I think this team can get to 6 and maybe one more, but maybe kind of, I don't know if it's a bold prediction, but I think this team can knock off somebody it's not supposed to. And I'm not exactly sure who that team is. Looking up and down the schedule, maybe it's Texas, but I mean, honestly, right now, I don't know just a whole lot about Texas to make that point. You know, Texas probably believes it belongs in the top 10, but whenever they're back, it is literally a statement that they're not.
Whenever Texas is back, you can just assume that they're showing their backside.
Right. So we can go down the schedule. We got Rice. I'm going to give Arkansas the edge there. And then Texas the next week. Is that like a toss-up right now?
I don't have Texas as a favorite.
You got Arkansas as a favorite?
I mean, I don't know if I have Arkansas as a favorite necessarily either, but I'm not.
So I think that would make it a little bit of a toss-up.
So, yeah, I would go with a toss-up. That could be a W or an L.
And then Georgia Southern.
That's a W.
Texas A&M.
Lord, they would need. That would be the game that I think if you Arkansas fans would have circled that said that if they could upset somebody, that would be it. But I think that's an L.
You win that Texas A&M game, you're coming out of the first 4 weeks, at worst, 3-1.
You're feeling pretty good about yourself.
Be feeling pretty good going to Georgia, and you would need to be feeling pretty good going to Georgia.
That's valid. But then, so you get through that stretch where you got to play A&M and Georgia. So just say you give both of those teams losses. The toss-up against Texas. If you give them a loss, worst case scenario, you're sitting at 2-3 because you need to beat Rice and Georgia Southern. But then you have winnable games at Ole Miss. Auburn doesn't scare me per se.
And Auburn comes to Fayetteville.
Yeah. UAPB in Mississippi State before you end the season at LSU, at Alabama, Missouri. If you win your 3 non-conference games you're supposed to win, and then you beat a team like Auburn, or, A&M's going to be good this year, so I don't know that I can just say that Arkansas is going to beat A&M. But if you beat one of those teams, then all of a sudden, that's how I can see them getting to 6. It's not going to be easy to sweep the Mississippi schools again, but you can do it. You can beat Missouri. Those are all games that you chalk up as winnable. At LSU, at Alabama, that's not a great draw, obviously. And then at Georgia as well is that's tough. So if you beat Texas, and then that gives you 3 games against Ole Miss, Auburn, 4 games. I'd say Ole Miss, Auburn, Missouri, and Mississippi State. If you can win 2 of those, then you'd be set.
That's what I was thinking too. Like you can get to 6 if you just split at least the Ole Miss and Auburn games. Because you got Rice, Georgia Southern, UAPB. I think you can beat Mississippi State, and I think you got that game in Fayetteville. You got Missouri. That game's also in Fayetteville. So, you feel like you competed really, really well with Auburn last year on the road. Arkansas is not going to be scared of them. There's not.
No.
So that gives you a little bit of confidence knowing that, you can play with those guys. And then Ole Miss on the road is going to be tough because that offense can score points.
And they're going to be kind of ticked about what happened last year.
Yeah. And, odds are they're not going to throw 6 picks again.
Hudson Clark.
You know what I mean? So that game's going to be really fun. I mean, that could be one of the wildest, maybe wackiest games of that college football weekend.
You mean Arkansas and Ole Miss being wacky?
Yeah.
Never.
Go figure. I remember going to Arkansas Ole Miss a couple of years ago, and Arkansas was down, I think, 14, 17 points. And then all of a sudden, I think Cam Curl comes out of a scrum, strips the ball, runs 69 yards for a touchdown, and it's like a brand new ball game. And it's just, you're like, of course that happened because this is Arkansas Ole Miss getting weird in the fourth quarter. They play wild games when they play each other, and so I'm not expecting anything different. But that game being at Ole Miss might give Ole Miss an advantage, but I like Arkansas is always. I think they're going to have a fighting chance in most games, just because Sam Pittman's instilled the toughness and kind of like this never quit attitude with these guys, and he's done it in just a little bit over a year. Like, just completely changed the attitude and the brand of football that's being played. And it's pretty exciting. But I think there's definitely a path to 6, and like I said earlier, I think Arkansas might be able to knock off a team, maybe that they're not supposed to on paper.
And then I pose to you the other question. Who are your MVPs? And the obvious answer to me would be the guy that touches the ball is going to be an MVP almost every time, is the quarterback, right? KJ has that opportunity, but I could see the emergence of Treylon Burks or Mike Woods being an MVP on the offensive side, or even if Treylon Smith stays healthy throughout the entire year at the running back position and can give you good minutes there, then I could see him being a problem as well. Who do you have as the offensive MVP?
I almost think it's got to be kind of not to say that Mike Woods is a second option, but I think most opposing coaches would look at Arkansas's receivers and say that Treylon Burks is their number one guy. And so to alleviate a little bit of pressure from Treylon Burks and, allow KJ Jefferson to not be honed in on just one guy, I think Mike Woods is a good option there. Like I said, I remember Mike Woods' freshman year. I think it was when Arkansas was playing North Texas. Mike Woods, as a young freshman, went up, and I feel like he climbed a stepladder and caught a ball on the sideline where he went up 10 or 11 feet and grabbed and pulled the ball down. And since then, I'm like, Mike Woods has got loads and loads of potential, loads of talent. Like, if he just keeps pushing, keeps progressing, keeps getting better, then he's going to be a real problem. And so I think if Mike can, and I know Mike's going to have lofty goals for himself for this year because he had a really terrific 2020. But if him and Treylon Burks can team up and be, just super, super, super reliable targets for KJ, I think Mike could be the MVP of this team. Like, Treylon Burks is probably going to, like you said earlier, can steal a lot of the headlines at receiver just because he's probably going to go into next season as, a Biletnikoff award watch list type guy. Mike Woods might too, but a lot more people are going to be looking at Treylon than Mike. But Mike is steady, he's consistent, super talented too. I think he could, if Treylon was out, I think Mike Woods might be able to carry a receiver's room right now. So I'd probably go with Mike.
All right, and then I don't have much to add. I think you hit the nail on the head there, so I'll leave that there. And then go into the defensive side. as we wrap it up here on the Whole Hog Football Podcast, what do you think on the defensive MVPs?
That's a good question. I mean, the easy answer would be like Grant Morgan or Jalen Catalon.
Right. And that could be the right answer. And don't necessarily overthink it.
Yeah. So, I mean, last year I feel like I would have said one of those two guys too. And then it would have, I mean, one of them had, like Jalen Catalon had the type of year that only one defensive back in the SEC has had like 87 plus tackles and 3 picks, and he missed like the equivalent of one game because officials don't know how to flag targeting properly. So he's so good. He's so dynamic, and he's fun to watch. Just the way he runs down, the way he gets downhill and makes contact with running backs. I don't want to be one of those running backs.
Never.
Ever. Like, you couldn't pay me enough to do that.
No, sir.
I was trying to think of like a candidate on the D line. Like who could that be? Like a Taurean Carter type. So I'm kind of high on him. You know, just the way that he maybe pushed toward the end of spring, took advantage of. He saw a little bit of daylight with Isaiah Nichols going down. Stepped in there. He was kind of, leading the defensive tackles through drills and stuff, and Sam Pittman was kind of encouraging him. He was like, I like where you are in the line. You're making a good push. I think he's a candidate, maybe dark horse. But, like, if you're just talking defensive team MVP, I think the kind of boring answer is Grant Morgan and Jalen Catalon, not because, they're far from boring players, but I think that's just the kind of the easy go-to. But maybe a dark horse might be Taurean Carter.
Okay.
Just one of those defensive linemen that could, help you create more havoc plays in the backfield.
That's good stuff, Scottie. All right. Any other observations, anything you want to throw out there before we wrap it up? Looking in the chat, nobody left us a question. Nobody likes us that much.
That's okay. We'll get there.
But anything else that I may have forgotten to ask you before, and you want to enlighten the people before we head on out?
Yeah, just going to a lot of spring practices this year. I appreciated the fact that the coaching staff allowed us to watch more practice this spring. In the past, in the spring and in the fall, we've normally gotten, anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. And you didn't really couldn't glean much from that because you didn't see any team stuff, no good on good. Probably 4 or 5 minutes of it is stretching. And so you're just like having to make observations based on how toned a guy's arms are, like if he's actually carrying good weight, that kind of thing. KJ Jefferson's got good zip on his pass, like that kind of stuff. This year, there was a practice where we stayed between 50 and 55 minutes, and we routinely were out there between 45 and 50. Saw some, substantial team stuff, and you can see guys who are making plays. Like Simeon Blair was a guy that saw kind of flying around, getting his hands on passes, tipping passes. Those open practices are why I wasn't really surprised when John David White made an appearance in the spring game, scored a touchdown. That kid, when he's got the ball in his hands, from what we saw in practices, he's got a little bit of wiggle to him. And that's not a surprise to people that know John David White, but it might be a little bit of a surprise to people that, maybe don't pay super close attention.
Yeah.
Because you know the top guys in the room, but maybe not very far down the lineup there. But John David White's got some wiggle. And routinely the practices, even when they were in thud, which, no pads on your legs, shoulder pads, helmets, those dudes were really physical. Really physical. I remember maybe it was the next to last practice. We got to see Dominic Johnson caught a short pass in the flat. 3 or 4 defensive backs converged on him, popped him, his helmet came off. They're just in shorts, shoulder pads,
nice
helmets, and it's just, you just give the ball back to the student manager, puts the ball down, they go again. just flying around, really physical. Honestly, I haven't been around for just a ton of spring practices. I've only been covering the football team for, I think, 3 years now, 3+ years.
And one of those spring practices got taken away from you.
By far the most physical spring practice that
Okay.
I've seen. I mean, it was routine. It was every day. I was also impressed with, the way that the offensive line got after each other. Like, it's just they're pounding physicality into these guys' heads, and they're making a tougher football team that is not going to lay down when they get hit in the mouth in games. I just think that's the type of football you can expect from Sam Pittman's guys.
All right. Well, that's good stuff, Scottie. Appreciate you joining us here on the Whole Hog Football Podcast, and we appreciate you watching the Whole Hog Football Podcast. Like I said, first time we've gone live with this. I hope we didn't mess up too many times. But if you want more Whole Hog information, you can obviously visit us on WholeHogSports.com. There's tons of write-ups in the red-white game. There'll be more information all summer long about football. It's the biggest sport for a reason. Everybody wants more information. We'll have it for you on WholeHogSports.com. Also, baseball season's still happening, and there is a Whole Hog Baseball podcast as well. If you're interested in that, you can find it wherever you are watching right now, or on wherever you listen to your podcast. And then there's also great baseball coverage at WholeHogSports.com. Well, for Scottie Bordelon, I am Seth Campbell saying thanks for joining us here on, well, what is this? A Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
Some good stuff. Scottie watched all the practices, some great insight. If you missed any of it, go back, watch it again, and learn something. As I said, for Scottie Bordelon, I am Seth Campbell saying so long, and we will see you back here next, I don't know when.
Next time.
Next time. That's a great
Yeah,
ending.
we'll be doing these throughout the summer, I'm sure. So we'll have some stuff to talk about. The next magazine is going to be the football preview issue. And so me and Clay were kind of brainstorming who we're thinking about, having profiles and features on and stuff for the summer. So there'd be plenty of stuff to talk about then.
All right. Well, as I said, for Scottie Bordelon, I am Seth Campbell saying so long. We'll see you back here sometime later.